traditionally, debt has blown up systems and has been very good for governments to wage war. That's typically. But and I'm not against credit. I'm against leverage. Okay. Credit, letter credit is what made commerce possible. So what we have is
talk a little bit about that. So then, what's the difference between credit, where you give me a loan and I allow and I say I'm going to pay you back, and that gives me the ability to get something in the short run that will help me produce more in the long run. That's okay.
Letters of credit most of banking started mostly. I trust you. You're going to go to Aleppo, Syria, and I'm in Florence, and you're going to send me some silk, and you trust me, and then I give you some money and then silk, and then my correspondent in Aleppo would pay you the minute I get my silk. That kind of transaction. So that's called letter of credit. You see, where you have like that conditional on some commercial transaction being completed. Okay, and it also allows people to finance some inventory. Provided the buyer is a committed buyer. That kind of facilitation of commerce is how it all started, the letter of credit, and developed very well. Before that, we had debt in society, and it led to blow-ups in Babylon, and then they had to have debt jubilees, and then of course the Hebrews also had debt jubilees, and of course say neither borrowers nor lenders shall be. Right. In the Septuagint, you see that and then you had the Romans didn't like that. The Greeks sort of didn't like that, except for a few intellectuals for some reason, like Mr. Krugman, liked that. And
by the way, that's really diminishing the currency of the term intellectual. But
okay. But and then of course later on that came back to Europe as a Reformation, and it was mostly to finance wars. The Industrial Revolution was not financed by debt. California. You told me that you read my book on a Kindle or something like that. This was not financed by debt; it was financed by equity. Right. So debt is not necessary. I mean, you can use it for emergencies, and of course we have a lot of societies, Catholic societies. Aquinas was against that, and his statements were stronger than the Islamic fatwa against that. Right. So just to tell you that we have learned through history that these things, debt as leverage, form of leverage, can blow things up. So this is where debt fragilizes. Now what we have had, of course, in this economy is growth of debt, mostly financed by indirectly by governments, because you blow up, we're going to be behind you, and that was, that's what we're dealing with.
So this is the problem with too big to fail, which went from being a worry to being inscribed in official policy.
Exactly, it became sort of like the mode, and then but you cannot separate the three. Right. Large government, you cannot separate. It's inseparable. The third point is skin in the game. Right. When you're a banker, all right, and you have the upside, no downside, what are you going to do? Create the maximum number of loans that don't blow up often, and collect your bonuses. It's like selling out of the money option, and then of course you blow up. Now, how do I link this to fragility? It's very simple. Fragility is short volatility, you see, and selling an out of the money option is short a certain class of volatility. And what you have is a banker has the option, he has the upside. And you have if you pay taxes every April 15, you're paying for his downside. Okay, that's it. All right. They may make money, but it still covers his downside. So this to me is not capitalism. It's misunderstanding of basic rules. And skin in the game, started with Hammurabi. It led later on to eye for eye, and led to the golden rules. Right.
Well, now talk about how skin in the game plays out then in the current financial crisis.
We know. I mean, I work on Wall Street. I work everywhere. You have a lot of forms of asymmetries that are not visible to the public. Corporation, right? You own a corporation, and then you go public now, and then you sell it to some manager. Now, a professional manager, his aim is to look good so he can collect the bonus. He doesn't really care about the intrinsic health of the corporation. In banking, of course, bankers, we bail them out. Banking, I wrote on the Black Swan. I got so many letters. Asked me to prove it because people didn't believe it, and also bankers, of course, didn't like my book. In 1983, by 1983, for the last quarter of 1982, banks lost more money in money center banks that quarter than they made in the history of banking, of money center banking, and of course we bailed them out. So we started the mode under Reagan. Right. And of course, later on, Greenspan made economic policy to accommodate.
And you referred to Greenspan as the fragilista doctor.
Fragilista, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
But it's not just Greenspan that was a fragilista. It was a system that bailed out banks, nationalized Continental Illinois, and then suddenly, allowed this asymmetries to prevail.
Where is that coming from, though? Is that and this is where you talk about it's. I mean, big government is necessary for that, but then the pressure is coming from the banking industry themselves.
Well, the whole combination, big government, big central government was a big, bailing out authority, coupled with a huge number of regulators who don't have a clue, and who eventually are indirectly on a take, because, in Africa, you see people have outright corruption, where I give you diamonds or something, whereas in Washington, you have this implicit, corruption. I call it the Tony Blair problem. The Tony Blair problem is you do a good job, and then you're going to go be able to work for $5 million a year at Goldman Sachs. So whatever you're going to do as a regulator is going to be there to either facilitate your job at Goldman Sachs or make regulations complex enough to make yourself necessary later on. And we have evidence of that.
Going back to that idea of a kind of fractal system, Adam Smith said that, while each person is pursuing their own, personal desires or their personal benefits, the whole system gets more robust. But you're saying actually that there are these actors in our system that are not the manager of a bank.
What makes
so how did that happen? Okay. And is that a necessary, or is it an inevitable outgrowth of larger and larger economic systems?
Exactly. No, it's not necessary for economic system. If you let things fail, if you don't let things fail, you're going to have concentration of mistakes. Right. You see, that plus asymmetries doesn't work very well. Plus risk hiding, where you have regular. I mean, I spent 20 years fighting something called value at risk, that was mandated by regulators and allows people to hide risk in the tail. It's not. So, to me, when you have skin in the game, it solves so many problems. Okay. People are harmed first by by their own mistakes.
So, with the banking system, how do we make sure that the banks? I mean, and this is a common thing that banks. Or mortgage underwriters were able to sell off whatever
There you go.
They had nothing to lose by making bad deals. So
exactly.
how do you keep their skin in the game, especially when things are going to be traded on secondary and tertiary?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to go as far as that. Just have at the level of a bank itself, all right? So we don't bail out banks. Here we're bailing out individuals through these securitized mortgages. But just take a level of a bank. Bob Rubin made $120 million helping to stuff Citibank with risks. Right. And his boss made even more. And then they blew up, we're paying for it. And bankers even spat in our face by paying themselves 2010, higher level of bonuses than ever in history, all right? But so how do we solve it? Very simple. I have rules. I don't believe in nationalization, but I believe as a taxpayer, I would have a list of banks, all right? Decentralization solves the problem, but if you don't have decentralization, have a list of institutions in this country, all right? Yeah. If they fail, would it be a national emergency to save them? Yes, no. If the answer is yes, you call them up, you tell them effectively, as of tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., you belong to the taxpayer. Right. The taxpayer should be able to set your bonuses. Okay? You see? That way you don't have this warped incentive.
Who is making that list? I mean, it would be
whoever. I mean, it would be the taxpayer, whoever represents it.
Government,
you pay taxes, government, whatever, however you want to do. You want to call it. I mean, you have government for that. But saying we cannot bail out a company. All right. De facto, they're civil servants. You see, so we have to decide on their bonuses. Right. So what would it do? It would force corporation to be small enough that they wouldn't be on that list. Right. That's one form. Right. Another one to solve associated problems would be what I call the Tony Blair rule. The Tony Blair rule: you cannot go work for the government, and ever later on have an income, higher income than what you earn, index for inflation, without paying it to the taxpayer. Why? Because I don't want the regulator to go make something, all right, to complexify his stuff to go make $5 million for Goldman Sachs. Go work for Goldman Sachs now.
Are these kind of thought experiments, or do you actually think that these are rules that could be implemented and enforced?
These are heuristics. I came up with simple heuristics, and you want to come up with heuristics that are not perfect, but very applicable and solve complex problems without having side effects.
Right.
Okay, and to me, it's very important, and to have these heuristics, and that would clean up Washington. If you have such a stringent rule, so you want to work for Goldman Sachs, go work tomorrow for Goldman Sachs. Don't go work, after a career. And so it should be that working for Washington should not be an investment strategy.
Right.
So that would automatically you control the government. On our.
Now you talk about decentralization, and one of the things that is kind of fascinating about the global economy over the past 50 years. I mean, you could argue over the past 1,000 years, is that in many ways it's becoming more and more decentralized. Certain types of knowledge are more decentralized than ever before. Economies, in many ways, compete in a way that they didn't before because investment, countries can no longer force investors to keep their money in a particular currency, in a particular geographic location. So are we, even as we're facing a global crisis, are we in fact seeing, is this a good thing
No, we have actually,
for you?
this is leading to more centralization.
Okay, well talk a little bit about that then.
We used to have, there's something in nature
But
called
globalization is generally a good thing, right?
It is if you know how to handle it, right? If you know how to handle it, if you let firms fail, okay? There's something called the island effect. And the island effect in nature is as follows. An island will have much higher number of species per square meter than a continent, and actually it's proportional to the square of the area. Yeah, so it is shockingly robust, across them. So we've lost the island effect. Now you have Google dominating the whole planet, stuff like that. It's not a problem. The thing is, if we stop letting these firms fail when they become ill, and they can get large enough to dominate government. So the problem is, if you let them fail. Now, computer firms, I'm not worried about.
Why aren't you worried about computer firms?
Because it's a competitive environment.
Right.
Google is a
so
product
it's
of a competitive environment.
we can see the end of Google on the horizon.
We can see the end of Google.
We know
Microsoft
is
no
different.
difference. No difference.
Right.
For you and I, if Google fails tomorrow,
right.
or there'll be something else. Don't worry. It's not like it will be dramatic, and the government won't save them.
Right.
Okay. So, and I don't think they'll fail because for that reason, given that they know the government won't save them. But if you have, so you can have some centralization, concentration. That's not the problem. The problem is we have had in almost all Western countries, nominally they say decentralization, decentralizing, but effectively they've had more and more power to the government, central government, like the United States.
Okay.
So you want decisions to be spread out. Now, government debt is a result of centralization, and typically the cause of more centralization. It's a very bad circle.
Right.
You see, government debt now, most of the debt now is transferred to the government with a small number of people calling the shots. And some fellow, with a beard who sort of looks like me, but I hope not too much, printing like there was no tomorrow. He has no clue. All right.
Why is that? Why is that not? Is not exactly what we need, though. We need a monetary stimulus. Because
we need. I don't understand. I don't understand this. No, I understand. I understand that the mistakes coming from that can be monstrous. The point is that you need to look at risks of things. You see, some planes may go faster. Right. But you wouldn't want to be on them because they're going to crash. Right. See, we've got to look at things with a risk adjustment standpoint, or the risk vision. There's another thing about skin in the game. Bureaucrats don't have skin in the game. They have spreadsheet looking at them. At local government, people are much more responsible for deficits. But the real cause isn't the smallest beautiful argument. The real cause is what I explained here. Everything comes back to volatility. When you're large, you get to be short volatility. Why? A £100 million project in the UK tend to cost 30% more in overruns and problems than a £5 million pound project. So you have these errors scale faster and faster, and that is bad for system.
How do we get to a point, because clearly, at least in terms of political economy and the intersection of big government and big business, there's no way in hell we're going to let companies fail anymore, it seems. I mean, what are the steps that can be taken to not necessarily scale things back, but just to finally say, okay, you know what, we're letting you go? Because during the banking crisis here, people were like, look, if you let these, I mean, Hank Paulson, who is certainly one of your bête noirs, he said, look, it's Friday afternoon. If we don't do something this weekend, on Monday, money won't come out of the ATM machines. How do you argue back against
You're libertarian, are you?
Yes, I certainly
You are libertarian. What would you rather have, nationalization of the banks or moral hazard in the system?
I would rather have moral hazard. Minimize moral hazard.
Okay, yeah. The way you minimize moral hazard, you nationalize immediately and then work with it.
Okay.
So what we've done is,
which is something Sweden did.
Hank Paulson led. Okay, the one thing people don't know, we're talking about deficits all the time. All right.
Right.
$500 billion every year. We looked at the firms, foreign and U.S., that were helped by the Fed during the crisis of 2008.
Right.
We looked at the compensation to their employees, $500 billion. Now, if that's not government money, what is government money? And that's part of our deficit. You see, that potentially we're going to have to pay back. Banking is a very inefficient business.
Right.
So I think that we should have nationalized. We wouldn't have had the problems we've had later, and then you would be forced to reorganize.
Do you think it worked then in the context of GM? Where there was effectively nationalization, where the president was dictating personnel decisions.
And nationalization is not something to save the company and bring it back to health. Nationalization is because the system doesn't work.
Right.
Okay, you nationalize and then you start from, you have, the government has control and we're no longer hijacked by the bankers. What has happened is the bankers took over the government. And with the Geithner
and so crowd. This is Geithner, Paulson,
Rubin.
Rubin,
if you see the difference between Rubin and Paulson, you need a microscope in the end, all right? So it's that mafia of Wall Streeters who took over the government. I mean, look at what happened in 2010. How can we, as taxpayers, tolerate their paying themselves the largest bonus pool ever in 2010?